It looks like a spaceship landed in Little Havana. Futuristic, striking, and utterly unforgettable. But behind the glass and concrete sits one of the worst stadium deals ever made in American history. No public vote, $634 million to build, $2.4 billion in public debt, and the guy who made it all happen, he walked away with hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. This isn't just a baseball story, it's a commercial real estate cautionary tale. This wasn't about baseball. It was a real estate deal that went completely sideways, at least for the public. In 2012, Miami opened a brand new stadium right in the middle of Little Havana. It was pitched as a turning point, a bold play to reinvigorate the franchise, boost the local economy, and reshape the neighborhood. But the fundamentals never made sense. The Marlins had one of the smallest fan bases in all of baseball. The area wasn't built to support a sports district, and the city went all in without any public vote or real financial protections. Almost immediately, the cracks started to show. The numbers were upside down, the assumptions were overly optimistic, and there were zero mechanisms in place to course correct if things didn't go as planned. What happened next wasn't just a disappointment, it was a real-time case study in how political ambition and poor underwriting can turn a flashy project into a long-term drag on a city's balance sheet. To really understand how this deal fell apart, you've got to look at the financing. Miami-Dade County issued over $400 million in revenue bonds to fund the stadium. But instead of using property taxes or something with broad voter support, they backed those bonds with hotel bed taxes and car rental fees, what people now call the Marlins Tax. On paper, it sounded pretty harmless. Let the tourists foot the bill. But those revenue streams are volatile. When tourism drops, so does the money to make debt payments. On top of that, the bonds carried high interest rates and ridiculously long maturities. One $91 million bond alone is projected to cost over $1 billion by the time it's paid off. And the real kicker? The biggest principal payments don't even start until 2026. So while city officials got to avoid the short-term budget pressure, they locked the public into a debt schedule that runs through 2048. This wasn't just bad math, it was a structured failure. A deal where the upside was immediate and private, and the downside was delayed and public. Before construction even began, the city handed the land over to the Marlins for just $1. In exchange, Miami was promised a wave of new development, restaurants, retail, housing, nightlife. It was pitched as a catalyst that would transform Little Havana into a thriving entertainment district. But there was one problem. None of those promises were actually in writing. No development agreements, no timelines, no performance clauses, just vague commitments and a lot of political optimism. More than a decade later, most of the lots around the stadium are still sitting empty. You've got a $634 million stadium surrounded by surface parking in a neighborhood that, economically, hasn't changed much at all. While the city took on long-term debt, the real winner in the deal was team owner Jeffrey Loria. He publicly claimed to contribute around $120 million to the stadium's construction, but a big chunk of that actually came from Major League Baseball's revenue-sharing program. Money meant to help small market teams stay competitive, not necessarily fund stadium deals. So even the so-called private money involved in this deal wasn't really private. Then just 5 years after the stadium opened, Loria sold the team for about $1.2 billion. He had bought it for $158 million. The publicly funded stadium helped boost the team's valuation, and Loria walked away with hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. Meanwhile, the team didn't improve. Attendance dropped from over 2 million in the stadium's first season to around 800,000 by 2019, dead last in Major League Baseball. So the public paid for the stadium, Loria cashed out, and the product on the field never delivered. The political fallout hit fast. In 2011, right before the stadium even opened, Miami-Dade voters recalled Mayor Carlos Alvarez in one of the largest local recall elections in U.S. history. Nearly 88% voted to remove him from office, and the stadium deal was at the center of the backlash. Voters felt misled. The deal had been rushed through without a public vote. Key details were kept out of the spotlight. And once the full financial picture came into focus, billions in long-term debt, minimal private investment, no real accountability, people were furious. The Department of Justice launched an investigation into how the deal was structured. No charges were filed, but internal documents showed exactly what people feared. No independent financial review, political pressure on city staff, and the term Marlins Tax became shorthand for a deal that stuck taxpayers with a bill for a stadium that couldn't even fill its own seats. For commercial real estate investors, this isn't just a political mess, it's a textbook example of how to not structure a deal. Start with the incentives. The public took all of the downside risk and the private owner got all of the upside. There were no profit sharing mechanisms, there were no clawbacks, no requirements for a surrounding development, just a straight transfer of value from taxpayers to the team. Similar to what we're seeing in Nashville right now, with Elon wanting to do his own tunnel. Then there's the financing. Revenue bonds backed by hotel and car rental taxes sound creative, but they're tied to tourism, one of the most volatile revenue streams a city can rely on. The math only works in a best case scenario, and if that scenario doesn't show up, you're underwater for decades. Next, the city made the classic mistake of trusting verbal commitments. Promises of mixed-use development and revitalization were never written into the deal. So, no deadlines, no legal requirements, just hope. And hope doesn't get financed. Worst of all was the lack of transparency. The public never had a chance to vote, there was no third-party review of the numbers, it was rushed, politically driven, and structured in a way that avoided scrutiny. In the end, the entire project ignored the most basic rule of real estate. Demand drives everything. The Marlins never had a fan base to support this kind of investment. A stadium, no matter how modern, can't manufacture demand where it simply doesn't exist. Today, the stadium, now called Lone Depot Park, is still one of the most visually impressive in Major League Baseball. Architecturally, it's a standout, but it also stands as a reminder of what happens when real estate fundamentals get ignored. It became a warning shot, not just for Miami, but for any city or investor thinking about public-private deals without guardrails. Because this is bigger than baseball. It's about structure, it's about incentives, and it's about the reality that no design, no marketing, no vision can save a deal that just doesn't pencil. For commercial real estate investors, that's the takeaway. If the numbers don't work, if demand isn't real, the rest doesn't matter. Whether you're building a stadium, a shopping center, or a mixed-use development, the math has to work. For anyone investing in commercial real estate, the story isn't about sports, it's about discipline. And in this business, discipline is what protects you when the optimism wears off. If you enjoyed this, leave me a comment below and let me know which failed real estate investment we should cover next.